Well, good morning, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon to some. Welcome to Journalism Under Fire. This is officially the halfway point of our conference, where we have 30 streams. Could have that number wrong, but I think we have 30 streams or so, and this is the halfway point. So, of course, I'm Sandy Campbell. I'm the Executive Director of the Santa Fe Council on International Relations. We're thrilled to have you join us here today. As many of you know, for 56 years now, we've partnered with the US State Department on its International Visitor Leadership Program. It's such an essential program of international exchange. Not only do we get to meet fantastic young global leaders from all around the world who come to Santa Fe as part of their program, but we also, by doing so, get to build amazing bridges of understanding, of connection, of empathy with and for other cultures, which I think we can all agree is one of the most important things we need in this world today as we heal from a lot of our past wounds. And of course, the more we get to know each other and understand each other, I think the more we understand all of us are in this very same boat together that we float upon in these global waters. And the more we get to know each other, the better I think we collectively are. So the reason I'm mentioning that is that today's panel on Hungary was really born a couple of years ago at the first Journalism Under Fire in 2018, when the State Department brought 48 journalists from really every corner of the globe to the first conference. And one of those journalists who will be speaking today, Veronika Munk, she came to Santa Fe during that time, and she participated in the conference at that time. And this summer, somebody sent me the Washington Post story featuring Veronika and some of her challenges in Hungary. And I thought, boy, that would be great to kind of connect the dots with her experience from the first JOF with this current version of JOF. So in the interest of doing so, I'm going to introduce Veronika first. And Veronika, welcome. I'm going to say hello to you. And Veronika, how are you doing?
Hello for everyone. Thanks, I'm doing really good. Thanks for the invitation for the conference again with this different structure online. Last time it was much better being offline in Santa Fe, in that beautiful city.
Much better. Well, let me ask you two questions. First one, what is something that jumps out at you from your time in Santa Fe? What was one thing in your experience at the conference that was noteworthy?
First of all, the whole conference was really, really useful for us. And as you mentioned, 48 of us was there from all around the world. And but that is popping in my mind that for us from very different cultures and very different parts from the world, we just felt that the journalistic values that the conference offered us was quite similar to each of us, even if we came from different continents on the world. And the other thing which was really important, that amazing city that you have with that amazing marketplace, jewelry, buying possibilities. I'm wearing these rings, what I brought there. So yeah, it was really, really amazing time.
So I know you went to a few other cities in the United States as well as part of this trip. What was one thing that you brought back to Hungary based on your experience in meeting with journalists and newspaper editors and all the different folks you met across the US? What was one sort of key learning or key takeaway that you brought back to Hungary?
Yes, we visited many news media outlets and TV channels and radio stations and media research institutes. So the program was really colorful. And the main takeaway for me was that even very interesting political circumstances, the profession of the journalists is really important. Like it's really important that any kind of democracy, you have to stick to the factual based news, and you have to provide fact based information for your audience. And I tried to do my job since then.
Well, we're thrilled you can join us today. Veronika, of course, is the founder and editor-in-chief at Telex, the former deputy editor-in-chief at index.hu, and she also teaches courses on journalism at Eötvös Loránd University. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And let me now bring in the rest of today's panelists, and I'll just briefly introduce them before handing off to today's moderator. We are also joined by Agnes Urban, who is an associate professor and chair of the Infocommunications Department at the Corvinus University of Budapest. She's an instructor of the subjects in media economics and media and audience research. Welcome to Journalism Under Fire, Agnes. Great to have you here.
Thanks for the invitation. It's my pleasure to be here.
Excellent. And our other panelist today is Szabolcs Panyi, who covers national security, diplomacy, and transatlantic relations for Direct 36, which is a nonprofit investigative journalism center also in Budapest. He's a founding member of esquare.org, a national endowment for democracy-supported Central European investigative journalism initiative. Welcome, Szabolcs.
Thank you for inviting me, and hello all.
And then, of course, today's moderator is one of our very favorites, David Marash. He, of course, has had a long and storied career in journalism from ABC News and Al Jazeera English. He is now the host of Here and There, which is a 4 times weekly series of 50-minute news interviews. Last year, on the JUF stage, he, of course, moderated a panel on fake news and all kinds of other fun stuff in the Middle East. And so we asked him this year to extend his geography north up into Eastern Europe. And Dave, it's always a pleasure. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Sandy, and thank you, panel, for joining us. Yes, this should be a very interesting discussion, and I want to start it out with a definition which does, I think, in many ways define our subject. And the definition is the word autocrat. Oxford Dictionary offers 2 short definitions for autocrat. 1, a ruler who has absolute power, and 2, someone who insists on complete obedience from others, an imperious or domineering person. America, of course, seems to have hopefully defeated its first and hopefully only autocrat president, Donald Trump, after only 4 years in office. In Hungary, Viktor Orbán, who in many ways does fulfill that dictionary definition of autocrat, has been in power now since 2010. And I thought it would be a very useful way to start our talk by asking Agnes Urban to give us a sort of brief history of the Orbán era from 2010 right up to the beginning of 2020, and then we'll dive into this year. But Agnes, would you sort of fill us in on the background of Viktor Orbán's presidency and particularly its relevance to journalism?
Thank you. I started personal remark. I was a teenager in 1990. And probably you know that it was the time of the political transition in Hungary. Actually, Viktor Orbán was a young and European politician at that time. It seemed that he would be the democratic politician who will prevail in this new system in Hungary. Basically, he really became a powerful figure, but in another way that we thought in 1990. Basically, our generation thought that the communist era is over, so it is absolutely sure that we will face with a bright and democratic future. And it became evident in 2004 when Hungary joined to the European Union. So we couldn't imagine that Hungary can be an autocratic country, but basically it happened because in 2010, Viktor Orbán and his party, the Fidesz, got supermajority in the Hungarian parliament. And it started a new era in the Hungarian political system. Basically, the system of checks and balances was destroyed in the last decade. Several institutions which were independent before, they are already controlled by the government. For example, Constitutional Court is one example, but there are also other important institutions. The civil society is under pressure because there is a continuous propaganda against the civil organizations. The NGOs are typically mentioned as Soros agents, and basically the propaganda is prevailing in Hungary in many fields. And the level of corruption is incredibly high. Of course, we always had a kind of corruption in Hungary, and brilliant investigative journalists reported about these corruption stories already before 2010. But in the last decade, there is a kind of systematic corruption in this country. And basically, this corruption is somehow financed by the European Union, because the funds are coming from the EU. So ironically, the European Union has a kind of responsibility in the current Hungarian autocratic system. And of course, there are a lot of problems with the Hungarian media landscape. I don't want to mention too many data, but I think it can be useful to know that Hungary's position in the World Press Freedom Index, published by Reporters Without Frontiers, is 89th. So we are on the 89th position in this year. We were on the 23rd position 10 years ago. So it says a lot about the dynamics of the changes. And of course, there are a lot of problems with the Hungarian media system. I don't want to go into details, but I just mentioned some important aspects. There is a strong market distortion by the government. The ownership concentration became incredibly high. And the state advertising became something very important in Hungary, because the state became the biggest advertiser. So the whole market is distorted. And I can also mention the government takeover of the public service media, which is absolutely problematic. And the Hungarian public service media became a propaganda machine, just like in the communist era. And we have a media authority called the Media Council. It is not independent anymore. All the 5 members of the Media Council were nominated by the ruling party. So it is the story in a nutshell, and I think Veronika and Szabolcs will tell you a lot about the difficulties in the journalistic work, because they have personal experiences about these current circumstances.
Well, it seems all over the world, and thanks very much, Agnes, for that brief history. Seems everywhere in the world, any bad trend that had been evident over the previous 10 years got worse in a sort of definitive way in this awful year of 2020. And the anti-press freedom trends in Hungary definitely got worse in 2020. 2 crucial events, and I'm going to bring Veronika and Szabolcs in to talk about this, but 2 crucial events in 2020 were, of course, the COVID-19 outbreak and the emergency laws that the government put in place in Hungary to respond to the crisis that had direct implications for news coverage. And there was also the takeover by a crony capitalist, and crony capitalism is in many ways the summation of the corruption in Hungary. You want to get ahead, you better be friendly with Fidesz party or with President Orbán and his friends. The takeover of Index was of great consequence and was in many ways the summation of a decade of government takeovers or crony capitalist takeovers of formerly independent media. Veronika, you are at the heart of all of this. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the crisis at Index, both its historical roots and its implications for consumers of free press and journalism in Hungary today?
Index is a 20-year-old online news daily in Hungary, and this when I was working there, that was the most read newspaper in Hungary. It's a 10 million country, and we had 1 to 1.5 million readers per day. So that was the main information point for most of the Hungarians. Index. I started to work there as an intern, and when I quit, I was deputy editor-in-chief in the newspaper, and I have been working there for 18 years. So it was a really important stage in my life, and I really like to work there because Index fulfilled every journalistic values that was important for me, and I think it was very influential in the Hungarian media sphere. But I had to quit July, and I was not the only one who quit. Basically, the whole newsroom, more than 80 people, quit on a single day when our editor-in-chief, Szabolcs was fired. And this was the last point. This was the red line when we felt that we can no longer work independently and according to those professional values that we believe in, but it was a much longer way when the situation became worse and worse, and not just at Index, but in the whole Hungarian media sphere. In the last 10 years, as Agnes mentioned, basically everything changed. There were more and more media companies whose owners, so in the ownership structure, there were businessmen who had strong connections to politicians, and there were less and less independent or critical news media in Hungary. So the Hungarian media sphere is really polarized. So there are outlets, media companies who basically pro-government media, and there are others who consider themselves critical or independent ones, and there is nothing in between. And there are some news outlets or media companies in the other side who consider themselves critical or independent, but they connected somehow to the oppositional parties. So the political influence is really strong, and it became stronger and stronger in the last 10 years. But I would not say that freedom of press died in Hungary. I would just say that the media pluralism is in a bad shape, because, for instance, in the online media sphere, you can find different type of the outlets, and you can choose what kind of media would like to consume. So the situation is not very good, but it's I still have hope that that somehow in the future the situation is gonna be better, basically because in the last 1.5 months, me and my colleagues could found Telex, which is a totally new independent online daily, and it seems that people being interested in having new independent outlets, so they financially so they contribute financially to consume these independent news sources like Telex.
I want to talk about Telex and the new model of journalistic economy that it represents in Hungary. But first, Szabolcs, you're an independent investigative reporter, literally the cutting edge of independent journalism in Hungary. What's it like to work under the present conditions in 2020? Can you do independent journalism and be both professionally and personally safe?
That's a great question. I mean, I'm asking that question to myself multiple times a day. Where's that line when I'd feel that it's just impossible to do what I want to do, because this is a profession that I find the most important for myself. 2020 is in lots of ways just the continuation of what Agnes and Veronika described. We're just seeing the consequences of those changes that happened throughout the last 10 years. And I just really want to bring in some very practical things, like what are those problems that affect our work. One is the extreme centralization of government institutions. This means that if you want to interview like a doctor or a nurse at a COVID ward, then you have to apply for a permit from some government figure. You cannot directly have anyone on the record who's in the healthcare profession. Otherwise, they would just get fired. Most of them are directly told not to talk to reporters. So when the whole COVID situation started, I think that the problem that we all struggled with is how to access reliable, independent information. Of course, after 10 years of living in Hungary, all of us doubt the official figures and the official statements. So we don't consider it reliable. And the government has been acting really shady in terms of bringing data, public information on how many infected people there are, how many people are on ventilators, etc., etc. So when we wanted to go directly to doctors or nurses, we found out that everyone is just so afraid to talk that it's basically impossible to have anyone on the record. The other thing that we saw happening, and I think you briefly mentioned this, is that our government passed a bill that gave unprecedented extra powers to the government. And some of these new paragraphs in the legislation directly affected the work of journalists. There was one particular paragraph that was briefly mentioned in the international press, which extensively covered this whole issue, is that the deadline for freedom of information requests was extended from, I think, 30 days to 90 days or something like that, or 40, 50 days. The problem is that although Hungary is formally a democracy, but the institutions do not work. If I want to file a FOIA request, usually it ends up at court. You have to sue the government to have those public records available to you. And by the time that the lawsuit is settled, sometimes 2 or 3 years passes, and all the information, the whole story itself is just outdated and not interesting anymore. The other problem that we are facing is also the consequence of the last 10 years, is that there are less and less independent outlets. That also means that if I break a story, a scoop, something, it gets quoted only by a handful of outlets. And the amount of people that I can reach throughout this, network of proper independent outlets who, of course, want to publish, want to cover everything that's newsworthy. So that space is just shrinking. This means that, for example, 5 or 6 years ago, if I wrote a story that was newsworthy to the competitors, it was covered by Hungary's 2 largest online outlets, Index, where I was also working, Origo, which was a similarly huge outlet. There were dailies, weeklies covering everything. And right now, what we see is that the government has centralized the media as well. It means that only the party line, only the official statements, the official figures are getting to a large share of the audience. Scandals about the lack of protective equipment for doctors, for nurses, or how overpriced the ventilators that Hungary has been buying from China are. These stories don't really have attraction among readers, especially in the countryside.
Yeah, and I can add one more thing, that the government held press conferences every day regarding the COVID situation. They just say the data, and they supposed to answer questions, but since it's online, the operation is that you have to send in questions if you are a journalist. But the funny thing is that they just picking from the question the ones that what they want to answer, and usually they don't want to answer the questions of the critical independent outlets. They basically only answer for pro-government media outlets. There are rare occasions when they answer for others, but for instance, in the last I don't know 40 days while Telex existing, they never answered our questions, and we sent questions every single day to this press conference.
Well, of course, the only thing worse than being ignored by government is being oppressed by government. If you read the 2020 emergency COVID-19 law, it's pretty clear that when they have their online press conference, your job as a journalist is to be a stenographer, to take down the words that they said and pass them along uncritically, because if you are critical or even divergent from the official version, you're risking arrest and criminal punishment. Veronika?
Journalists are not being arrested in Hungary, and we are not. They don't put us to jail, and and our life. I've never felt my life being threatened because I'm a journalist, but there are many legal ways. While if someone would like to harm a media company or a journalist personally, they can do it. There are many libel, that's the word, right? Libel cases against journalists, but usually, I mean, I don't have the exact data, but it's quite rare when if you do the job, and if you check the facts, and if you use the sources, then it's really rare that a journalist lose a libel case on the court, and it's very rare that it reaches the court, because usually before that, in an earlier stage, is being stopped by authorities. So I have been working as a journalist in the last 20 years, and I never lost any libel cases, but those happen. So companies and sometimes politicians file those reports, but still we can continue to work as journalists. We can go to to press conferences, they don't answer, or they rarely answer. But and what Szabolcs mentioned, that it's really hard to find sources on the record because they just fear, they don't want to being exposed in the media because they fear that they will lose their job. And during the economical crisis, I think it's became more serious.
You know, this kind of resistance from government officials is bad enough, and to see it from people who are even temporarily under government supervision, like patients in a COVID-19 hospital or doctors, again, is sort of bad enough. But I found when I was reporting in Ukraine that the easiest way to clear a street was simply to pull out a television camera because nobody wanted to be seen, much less talking on camera. When you do what we would call man on the street, when you talk to just ordinary citizens unaffiliated with government, maybe not under complete government control. So, Szabolcs, will they talk to you? Can you interview just ordinary citizens, or is there so much fear and self-censorship that it's a wasted exercise?
Well, first of all, the whole Hungarian society is so polarized. You know, you have those who support Premier Orbán and those who don't. So if you happen to ask someone who's a supporter of Orbán and he or she asks you from which organization you're coming from, you might end up, you know, being being in a debate. The guy's gonna swear. He's gonna label you an agent of George Soros and stuff like that. And usually the problem is that people just turn you away, tell you that, you know, I'm not interested, I don't want to talk, and to go to the street with a camera, but to actually have someone actually saying something, that only happens if that particular person is a critic of Viktor Orbán, and if that person really wants to you know, bravely tell what he or she thinks. If it's just an apolitical person, he or she will turn you away. But I also have to say that when I'm as a journalist, when I'm looking for sources, it's more common these days that people want to meet in parks. They want to meet in when restaurants are open. Want to meet in like the furthest corner of a bar or a restaurant where people won't see us. I also had, like, for example, meetings with senior government officials who didn't want to be seen by their colleagues. So we met at the basement of a hotel and things like that. So it's, you know, sometimes you feel that people are just consider you as bad luck, being seen, being photographed with a journalist. You know, that can be threatening to their jobs, that they can get fired and stuff like that. That's
like the sign they used to put on the back of school buses: "Journalists, keep your distance." It can be dangerous to talk with them. Agnes, how do these general conditions affect news consumers in Hungary? The other end of the journalistic ecosystem, our customers, our clientele, have they been made completely mistrustful and cynical about journalism as well as about government official pronouncements?
Actually, I can say that there are different bubbles in Hungary. There is a pro-government bubble and there is a government critical bubble. And these two bubbles get completely different kind of news if they do not have high news awareness and they do not have any kind of cross consumption. Basically, the pro-government news consumers get know that everything is fine. Orbán is a fully respected politician all over the world, and Hungary is strong, and we are very successful in our battle against the COVID. at least the other countries are much worse than Hungary, and so on. So there is a continuous success story. Of course, the government critical news consumers who consume the independent media outlets, they have very different picture. So we know that there are a lot of social and political and economic problems in Hungary. We know that the COVID data are not transparent, and the healthcare system is in trouble. We know that Viktor Orbán is heavily criticized by democratic politicians all over the world. So basically, people have different kind of picture, and it makes the dialogue among people rather difficult, because people do not really understand each other. And of course, I know it is not a special Hungarian problem. So this kind of bubbles are quite typical all over the world, especially because of the social media and so on. But the situation is absolutely awful in Hungary right now.
Well, the authoritarianism and lack of press freedoms in Hungary has been of repeated concern for the European Union, and several of the big global press freedom organizations, like my own Committee to Protect Journalists, Reporters Without Borders, the International Press Institute, all begged the EU to intervene and try and get Hungary to open up restraints on journalists. Does the EU really have any impact on Viktor Orbán and policy in Hungary? Any one of the three of you who wants to jump on that, please.
Of course, they could have if they wanted to, but they just don't. I mean, there were multiple occasions when Viktor Orbán and his government was harshly criticized in the European Parliament or by the European Commission. There have been so-called infringement procedures against Hungary. There's also an Article 7 procedure, meaning that hypothetically Hungary could be stripped of its voting rights in the EU, but these are going nowhere because of political compromises. And Viktor Orbán's party, Fidesz, is a member of the European People's Party, the largest center-right party, which is the most powerful party inside the European Union. And because of party loyalty and party politics, they are just having his back.
It's been said, and Kenneth Roth of Human Rights Watch made it quite explicit, that the fear is that once a government, an authoritarian or autocratic government, starts cracking down on press freedoms, this opens the way to crack down on other freedoms, particularly relating to LGBTQ rights and gender diversity, but many other basic freedoms start to get crimped when press freedom is crimped. Veronika, do you see that happening in Hungary? Are the restraints of the press being echoed in restraints on other aspects of social or political behavior or choice?
Well, definitely. So the situation is being parallel. So I do not see the direct connections with how the press freedom aspects being threatened or attacked by the government, and how the LGBTQ community is being attacked by the government. So I cannot see the close connection, but I can see that both phenomena is happening in these days, and I can say one more important freedom types, that freedom of educations. The largest art University in Budapest, where actors and directors and theater university is being centralized, and the freedom of education is being harmed. So these three phenomena is happening in the same time in 2020 in Budapest, Hungary. So yes, I can confirm that you mentioned.
Well, here's a question from a viewer, Jay Zednik, which is, I think, quite relevant here because the loss of these freedoms, you would think, would alienate a lot of the public. But in election after election, Fidesz and Orbán win. What are the sources of his popularity? Szabolcs?
Well, one main source is suppressing free media. So when your voters only get to hear one narrative, the narrative that the government is echoing, that the country is successful, but we are under attack by internationalist, globalist forces, by Brussels, by Hungarian American billionaire George Soros and his web of NGOs, then people just they're gonna believe it because there are no alternative sources for them. As Veronika mentioned, of course, you can find independent news sources online, but there are lots of news consumers, especially elderly, especially less educated, especially in the countryside, who mostly consume print media and broadcast. They watch the public TV, which, as Agnes described, is just state propaganda, communist style, or they are reading the print newspapers, which are also centralized and edited by a central newsroom, which is directly overseen by government-appointed people. So that's a main.
It's hard to overestimate how important what Szabolcs just said. 10 years ago, even 6 years ago, Hungary had not only large metropolitan news organizations, but like most modern countries, a lot of local news or regional news based in the provincial towns. And in 2018, all of that got consolidated into one foundation called KESMA. Tell us a little bit about what difference that has made, the consolidation of all these small local and regional news platforms into one big KESMA foundation.
Basically, I can give some background from ownership point of view, and maybe Veronika and Szabolcs add something from journalistic point of view. But anyway, it is important to know that this so-called KESMA, the whole name is Central European Press and Media Foundation, is far the biggest media owner in Hungary. It owns, for example, all of the regional newspapers. We have 18 regional newspapers. All of them are owned by KESMA, just like the big news portal, the Origo, the only national commercial radio, the so-called retro radio, and a lot of and of course a news channel, a news television channel, and some smaller radio stations, and also some political weeklies and political dailies, just like some news portals. So altogether, almost 500 media brands are owned by a single owner. So it is the biggest media company in Hungary, and it also means that even the commercial advertisers have to advertise in KESMA media outlets if they want to reach mass audience. So it clearly distorts the market, and this high ownership concentration basically kills the media pluralism in Hungary. And concerning the journalistic side, of course it is a propaganda, but I think the others can tell more.
Even leaving aside the propaganda question, in the United States, we're seeing similar consolidations on the free market model. But when these corporations acquire literally hundreds of radio stations, local newsrooms tend to disappear, and one big central newsroom puts out stories that are on local stations but have no real connection to the local market and damn little local knowledge of what they're claiming to be reporting on. Has that problem also been caused by the Kesma consolidation in Hungary? Szabolcs or Veronika, would either one of you want to take that on?
Yes, the case is definitely that you just described. That there is a central newsroom for Kesma, and they provide basically the same articles to the Western Hungarian counties and the Eastern Hungarian counties, which the population is totally different, and the situation of the people is totally different, and there are no local information or very few local information in these newspapers, which traditionally these county newspapers were really quality. They had really quality journalism with excellent, sometimes excellent investigative pieces. Those totally disappeared. And but the problem is, or I don't know, it is a problem, yes, that the people in the countryside kept buying these newspapers because that's what their fathers and grandfathers bought, so they just kept subscribing for them, so the impact can be quite large because the Hungarian population is not very political. So there is this really large proportion of people who don't consider themselves politically interested. So they just keep buying the same newspapers, and they somehow being influenced, that's my opinion, by the propaganda press.
Veronika, you were the deputy editor at Index when your boss, Szabolcs was fired by the new management that took over. Now you are running something called Telex. I take it that editorially, Telex is pretty close to Index, but it's based on an entirely different economic model. Do you want to spell that out? Because this obviously could be very important for the future of journalism.
Yes, we started Telex in the beginning of October, and we started with quite a large newsroom with 70 people in it. In the Hungarian media sphere, it considered to be a large newsroom with 50-something journalists and the publisher side. So there are 70 of us, and every single person has been worked at Index. So we just stick to each other, and we wanted to create a new newspaper when we felt that we can no longer work there. So we thought, okay, then we will work in another place, and we will create something for ourselves, which based on our values, our journalistic values. So we started Telex, and our vision was to fulfill that void that was created when we quit Index, and we thought that it's important in the Hungarian democracy that people needs to have needs to have a new general interest news portal which is impartial, and which is critical and which is interesting and independent. So we thought that we try this, and we didn't have any money. So 1 month before Telex was started, in the beginning of September, just 2 months later, then we quit Index, we started a donation campaign. So we told to people that, look, here we are, 70 of us, you know what we can do, because we have been doing that in the last 20 years. And guys, you remember that we are those journalists who can provide fact-based information and quality journalism, so please give us money. Basically, that was the message. And people heard us. And in the first month, they provided 1 million euros. I don't have the conversation to dollars. Please help me, Dave. 1 million euros
would be about these days between 1.1 and 1.2 million dollars.
Okay, thank you so much. So they gave us $1.2 million, which was enough to start Telex, and subscription-based news media in Hungary is basically non-existent in these days. In the region, in the Central Eastern European region, there are quite a few examples of news media outlets online, which based on subscription models or membership models or based on donations, like what we did. But and there are some other outlets in Hungary who collected donations before us. So we were not the first, but we were the most successful regarding the amount and regarding that. I think our story that we quit together and we said no to the political attacks, and we said that okay, just we walk out the door and we will continue it in another place, so please give us money. And that's when the Hungarian thought that okay, this is the time when we have to pay for news media, not just at the newsstands on the street, but online as well.
Szabolcs, this kind of subscription model, or the GoFundMe model, if you will, that is working for an institution like Telex, is it possible that this model can work for more independent freelance operators like yourself as an independent investigative journalist? Can you get subscribers online as well?
Well, I think there are two different models here. One is subscription based, and the other is donation based. The outlet that I'm working for, it's a small nonprofit, so we don't have any ad revenues or anything like that. All of our content is for free. We're called Direct 36, and we accept donations for which we give membership. We offer extra content to those who are supporting us. But I guess on the long run, what is very essential to have the for-profit outlets having established subscription-based models. You can run a small nonprofit based on donations because you can find people who support the cause of free media. But on the long run, I mean, we're living in a capitalist system. You have to have consumers, you have to have people, and you have to convince them that information comes for a price. If you want to access factual information, if you want to have news that it's not filtered by the government, then you have to pay the journalist to do that. And I think that the Hungarian media landscape is struggling mostly because of the fact that Google and Facebook have been sucking away advertisements from it, which basically shook the economic foundations of the media. Then you have the situation described by Agnes, how the government distorted the economic model further. So the only way out of this situation, the only way to consolidate, to empower independent outlets, is to convince the readers to pay for it. Of course, in the United States, you have huge outlets being very successful, both in digital subscription and to some extent in print subscription. But in Hungary, digital subscription is still a novelty. So Veronika and her team will have a very important mission to convince people to follow this method and just pay for the news.
Yes,
Agnes,
especially, and I just would like to add something which is an important factor in this whole thing. That yes, we are being a privately owned company, but we fulfill a function like a public, but what the public service media doesn't do in the country. So there is this problem: if you put the content behind the paywall, then how people can consume fact-based information. So that's what we would like to create our own model. That because if we put everything behind the paywall, that in the long run, and the other outlets, the other critical and independent outlets do the same because they want to survive this horrible economic situation, then what remain to the society? Only the propaganda will be for free. So that's a big question that we have to deal with.
Agnes, the traditional economic structure for journalism, as for most capitalist media, is trickle down. The money comes from the top, and so does the direction. Telex is depending on reversing that model into a bubble up in which consumers underwrite journalism because they believe in the need for it. Is it your sense that the Hungarian populace is starting to come around to this idea that if we want independent, fact-based journalism, we've got to help pay for it?
Basically, I'm rather optimistic. We just had a survey and we found that 5% of the population is willing to pay for quality news. And basically, of course, it should be much higher, but I hope it will be it will be an increasing trend in the next years. And there are a lot of people here in Hungary who see that, as Veronika mentioned, so the propaganda is free, but it doesn't work too much, and there is a kind of news awareness, at least in some part of the society, and more people try to finance the independent and high quality media.
We got time really for one more short question and answer. And Veronika, I'd like you to just give us your pitch. When you go to Hungarian readers online, how do you address them? How do you sell them on the idea of buy this fact-based journalism product?
Well, I basically, when I had those money collecting donation awareness campaign, I just said that, guys, you know us, you know who we are, and you know the job what we've been doing, because that's the case, that the Hungarian audience knows this journalistic community that I'm working in. So I say that Telex is an impartial and interesting and entertaining general interest news portal, and that's what you need because the media pluralism is in a bad shape in Hungary. So please give us money. Usually I say something like that.
Well, this is, of course, the argument that all of us make in journalism, that what we do is important and that we need your readership and engagement, but often we need your financial support. Well, I want to thank our panelists. This has just been such an informative discussion. Veronika Munk, Szabolcs Panyi, and Agnes Urban, thanks so much for explaining the situation in Hungary to us. Sandy?
Thank you, Dave.
Well, let me just second that. That was absolutely fascinating. Most appreciated. Thank you so much. We would, of course, love to see you join us in person in Santa Fe one of these days very soon. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for coming. And just very quickly for the rest of you out there, we, of course, are going to be continuing our exploration of this fascinating world of journalism tonight at 5:30 Mountain Time, when we bring the world's foremost expert on deep fakes or manipulated videos or shallow fakes. There's lots of ways that we can make video do things that it didn't actually do. That's at 5:30. Haney Farid will be speaking. It's going to be truly fascinating. So once again, let me thank our panelists. Good luck to you and all your endeavors. And I hope we see you really soon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.